Hello, Blue and Keith, and whoever else is interested in watching this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the vision for the graphical user interface of um, AI War 2. Um, right now, there's some things to love and other things not to. Um, One of the things that I've shifted very recently, like yesterday, is making it so that the buttons are more dark and have this more slightly more sci-fi feel to the edges of them. So that's nice. Um, that helps somewhat. Um, the actual um, tooltip windows, big tooltip windows here. Um, for one thing, this doesn't scale down well, as you'll notice. If I had this screen set up larger, then it would be a whole lot more legible. But basically, what I would like to do is replace all of these icons that have lots of colors and interior depth and kind of a cartoony style to them. And they've got more than one color. They have a border for one thing. I'd like to move away from that and move towards the kind of vector flat icon um, look that you see in some of these packages, like this sort of thing, and um, this general style of stuff. Now, there's only so much information we can convey in one color, and it's likely to get darn monochrome as we do that. But the nice thing is that if we start with a white base, then we can use actually diffuse colorization to go in and say, for the metal stuff, let's give it a slight reddish tint, and uh, for the power stuff, let's give it a yellow tint, and whatever. And we can actually make it so that the icon and the numbers that are associated with it have the um, same exact color. Now, we've got a few different resources up here. You've got the hacking, which right now we've got is kind of a green thing. Science is definitely, light blue. Power is, definitely yellow. Metal, I think, is kind of by default red. I've been moving to a grayish, blackish background so that we're able to do um, a variety of colors without them kind of clashing with what's underneath there. And also just so that it's not so visually overwhelming as it was getting. Um, and fuel, therefore, most naturally, I would think of fuel as being like a gray or a black, and that's where I was going with that. But that doesn't really work when we're talking about something that's showing on gray or black. And don't want to go with something that's really white with that because all of the kind of non-specific stuff, just regular text and whatnot, it's going to be white. And same deal with gray. It's going to be for like less important non-specific text. So, magenta would feel kind of weird. And I don't know. Maybe fuel would make sense as actually being green instead of hacking, and it's kind of like a toxic waste icon, that kind of fuel or something. And the hacking is instead magenta, like a computer virus or something. I don't know. Right now, these things are done as pixel art, and we need to switch those over to being more vector styled, but then making it so that, of course, they can be rastered up and down to anything. An interesting kind of question, though, is if we're going monochromatic with this, in other words, a base of just white, then that actually opens us up to, in theory, making a font, either a TTF font or an OTF font, where um, like wingdings, basically, but where all of the glyphs are the icons that we want to intersperse through there. And using the what is it, Text Mesh Pro tool that we have, we're actually able to do things like switch up fonts in the middle of when we're writing and things like that. So that would actually be pretty useful. We can also colorize things as we're writing. So that is something that we could do, that would give us a lot of flexibility. Blue, you would probably have to look into that, because the way that fonts are created, the benefit of that, one of the benefits of that, is that it would, in theory, both reduce and enlarge really well, like a vector does. However, fonts use a system of points and hinting, which is a bit different from how vector art uses points and curves or splines. And so I don't know if there's a tool for cleanly translating arbitrary um, uh, SVG type vector art into fonts or not. And I don't know what sort of detail loss, if any, there is when you switch from vectors to um, hinted glyphs, basically. So it's a thought. One of the things, either way, is that we can kind of embed these a bit more and go from there. When we come and we look at the individual panels for something like, for instance, the pop-up tooltip here for the arc, this presentation in general makes no sense to me, because there's a bunch of gaps in there for things that aren't relevant for the arc. Now, I understand why that's being done, but what I think we need to do is we don't want to have every possible permutation. It's not possible. What I'd like to move towards is having something like 3 to 5 different um, general plate types that have things in fixed positions. And so, for instance, most structures, they're not going to have movement stuff. A lot of, the defensive ones, they're not going to have any sort um, of the various strengths and weaknesses. They're not going to have um, firepower, any of that sort of thing. So, I mean, there ought to be some general sets that we can say, okay, ship or structure A belongs to plate, number 1. Ship or structure B belongs to plate 2, and we can turn on and off some specific things. But where right now we just have these big gaps in here, which just looks weird. We should instead be graying out things. We're saying, and make it very grayed out, but basically saying, there is no whatever's supposed to be in that hole. I don't know what it is, but there is no blah for this particular ship, because even though it falls under this general plate, it's not subscribing to that particular sub aspect that most of the things with this plate, I suppose, do. And then I guess there's some weird status effects that just some minority of things inside a plate have. And there's kind of like, if you look on the right hand side of this arc, that'd be a good spot to put those, as kind of I can't point while also having the mouse cursor over it, but on the right side of the tooltip there, you've got a couple of icons, and having a dedicated space for weird stuff that might be extra attributes, whatever. And if we actually took this tooltip, and it wasn't just a box, but instead it was kind of a segmented arrangement. So it was clear that it's clear why it is the size that it is. Because right now it looks bizarre that it's that size. We should have some bounds around the place where the description text is to say, hey, you know, this is the flavor text area. If you think about like a Magic the Gathering card, for instance, let me pull one of those up really quick. The Gathering. So I mean, if we've got, for reference, I mean, Pokemon, whatever. You've got overall, you've got this big area that's got the picture. Fine, there's always a picture there, whatever the card is. The name always up here. The cost always there. Stuff about the type always there. A little icon saying, what set it's from, always there. If it has any abilities, it will be here, but this will be filled to a varying degree. It might be practically empty. In fact, on the later lands, they started started having them be literally pretty empty. I don't see any of those, but you've got ones like this that are way more empty, but it makes sense. You don't feel like, oh, what's wrong with this card, because it's centered in this area, and it just makes sense. Now we have it. So if we come up with a number of different plates, they're essentially like a number of different little card formats, and we can put things into them. And with the things that are always there, like the icons, blue, that can be in a Photoshop PSD file that we literally kind of bake it all in as just one thing, and it just pops into Unity. And then Keith, we don't have to draw an image for the icon. We just draw the text in the place next to where the icon would be. The icon is baked onto the underlying spot. And that's really useful. We were doing that in Stars Beyond Reach. Fewer draw calls. Not that we're having individual draw calls for the GUI here anyway, but when the GUI updates, it's having that, it's a little bit less compositing. So there's all that. One of the things that goes along with this is we have an unknown amount of flavor text, right? And for one thing, text in general, words are wider than they are tall. And so having the tooltip in general also be wider than it is tall makes a lot of sense to me. This one's kind of stubby and tall, but having it be wider than it is tall by a much bigger degree, I think makes more sense. And that way we can fit more flavor text in there if we need to. One of the things we can do is I've got some reports from, I think, Badger saying that there is some unit that has description text that is cut off. Now, Keith, I think that what you're doing right now with the text is you've got some complicated word wrapping stuff going on where it's trying to like size itself down and whatnot. What I'd like to move towards, if we can, is basically saying the text is drawn at X font size there. But if we have one that is unusually long for some reason, then we can have a little multiplier thing in the definition of the ship that says, actually draw its text at 0.9 times whatever the font size is supposed to be, and then boom, it fits, and we don't have to, we'll get those cases where it's cut off until somebody says, hey, it's cut off, and then we go, whoops, 0.9, and then 0.8 maybe. Actually, oh, wow, this one's really long, 0.7. And then the stuff fits, and it's smaller font then, but, what you're going to do. Incidentally, it is actually possible to embed that sort of thing in the text itself. You can downsize things within the text. So if there is some text that is more important and then like a longer addendum that's less important, then in the text itself, you can use the markup from TextMesh Pro to say, size something smaller, 5, whatever. And at that point, then you have the bigger piece that is the most important stuff, and then the smaller stuff that comes after. Oh, good grief, that's political. Um, and Overwatch, whatever. But you've got this sort of thing. Yeah, whatever. Lots of fake magic cards. So that's what I'd like to see with these tooltips in general. And when we make the tooltips, uh, going icon based is great, but um, I don't know what this is. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that or that is. I know what that is because I helped color it. I'm I don't know what that is. That must be shields, probably. I guess that's probably speed, but it doesn't have any. I don't know. So, I'm in the development team and looking at these. I don't know what most of these icons mean. Um, you know, the learning those icons is going to be hard. And to me, having a big wall of text is obviously bad, for sure. But one of the things that we can do is anything from changes in color to orientation to size to font type to how things are broken up into panels can make things seem more or less text heavy. And so, for instance, whatever these are these actually real? I don't even know if these are real magic cards at this point. Nope, StarCraft. um, you've got the really bold stuff up here, for instance, and you can tell what type of thing to look. Hey, this is within this box and it's bold. That's very clearly different from these things that are saying what its abilities are. And then down here, the flavor text that's in italics and a little smaller is again set off a bit. And then things that have like a mana cost of some kind, colorless in this case, they have special font and um, special. Yeah, that's the same thing. Special font and colors and so on. Like, yeah, there's 2 white. These are stupid. Yeah. So 2 and a blue, and then blah blah blah. And so, I think that these are a bit text heavy, but bottom line is, what I think we can do is we can say something like, okay, if this is metal, then make the metal icon. Here again, we can go a little bit wider than we can tall. We've got, in general, our screens are wider than they are tall, even with the old 4x3 ones. Certainly with mostly being 16 by 9 and 16 by 10, that's really the case now. So, if we don't do a 32 by 32 equivalent type thing at whatever the actual dimensions are, if we did instead like a 48 by 32, then we have room to do a variety of things. You could put the metal icon here and then MET written vertically, or you could put like a metal icon that's wider and then like METAL but spelled out in a font that is really different from all the other fonts. Like, it would need to be one font for all the icons. It's like something really bold that stands out from the description font. And you'll notice I already changed the numbers font here to be a little more italics and bold, and it's something that shows numbers well. Hooray. And then we've got a different header font now. Thanks to Badger for that suggestion. But I think that if we can take that overall approach, then we can come up with something that people aren't necessarily going to know exactly what it means at the time. But if I see a little thing that is, I don't know about a speedometer, but I don't even know what to show with that. I mean, the speedometer, I guess, is pretty good, but I don't know, a little speed bike or an engine or I don't know, something, and it says like SPD or SPED, fully spelled out speed underneath there, then I'm going to go, speed, yeah. And I can kind of get that. And if there's a kind of shieldy looking thing and it says, you know, SHLD, or going explicitly to 3 letters gets tricky. Sometimes you need 4, but Final Fantasy 1 shows you can do it in 4. But so I think that will help with the tooltip. And if we can get the tooltip set up, then that's basically the first part of the battle. Getting the tooltip set up as a plate that is its own thing, or a series of 1 to 3 different plates that individual ships subscribe to, and then show themselves in a sanitary fashion that makes sense within there. I think that can kind of then start to inform the rest of the GUI. The section up here along the top bar would probably be my next target of opportunity, because a lot of what we take from down here would just really easily apply up to the top. We get into the more complicated things like the build menu and the sidebar and some other things like that later. And even when it comes to like the ship icons, there's some different things that I want to consider, despite all the work that's gone into those. So, well, there's some things we can think about, but first of all, let's see if we can get a good mock-up of that tooltip. And so Keith, that would be, I'd need, basically a design of permutations from you. What are the permutations that we have that are worth splitting out? And then out of those, like, what are the things that turn on and off? And which bits are more important? I mean, those notes go to blue. And then she can put something together that actually arranges that in a sensible fashion. So anyway, I think that's where we go next with the GUI as far as going into mock-up iterations. So if we can get that tooltip looking good, then that's a major win. All right. Thanks, everybody.